Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I would like to welcome my old friend, Masu, whom I haven't seen for some time, but I know that she has a great love for literature and that she has spent many hours reading. And when she first came back to our country, she spent a lot of time in my library when I was in the university library. So without further ado, I would like Dosu to talk about maybe the favorite authors and books and good stuff like that.
I understood that Mr. Tokan was supposed to be doing all the talking, but he's passed it on all to me. So he has asked me to speak about the books that I like and how I came to like reading and libraries. So I think I have to start by explaining that my first introduction to books and libraries was through the United States Information Service Library when I was very small. I must have been about 4 or 5 when my mother first started taking the 3 of us, my 2 older brothers and me, to the USS library to borrow books every fortnight. We'd borrow 2 or 3 books and then take them back, keep them for a fortnight, go back after 2 weeks to exchange them for new ones. To begin with, of course, I only chose books with lots and lots of pictures because I couldn't really read very well. But the pictures inspired me to want to read because I wanted to know more about what the characters were doing. And starting from simple fairy tales and children's stories, I proceeded to short stories and longer stories. So I think love of reading has to be fostered very early in life. It helps if it is fostered early in life. Of course, some people take up reading later in life, but if reading becomes a lifelong habit, it helps you in so many different ways. When people ask me whether my years of house arrest went hard, I always said no, because I had a lot of books to read. And as long as you are able to make books your companions and they are there, then you need never be lonely because you can go anywhere you like through books and you can learn so much about other people, other countries, other cultures. This to me is the joy of reading, that it gives you a chance to enter different worlds from your own. It gives you a chance to understand how other people think and what kind of experiences other people have been through. And it also helps you to cope with your own life. I was very well aware of what life in prison was like, even before I came anywhere near politics, because I had read a lot about prisoners of conscience and other types of prisoners and how they cope with life in prison. The very first day I was taken to insane jail, I looked around for all the possible bits and pieces that I should collect that might be useful to me in future. This is something that I had picked up from books, that you never know what might come in useful. And you don't throw anything away if you're in prison and you manage to keep it, you keep it. It might come in useful, but some of the things did come in useful. So these are the little practical things that you learn through books. And of course, more than that, you learn how people cope intellectually and spiritually with the challenges of life. And that I have found to be most useful. And the kind of books I like best are the books that make me think, that help me to pursue new channels of thought. It's also a way of understanding why other people behave in a way that you would not expect them to behave. If you've read enough books, hardly anything surprises you anymore. I first went to England when I was 19, but nothing surprised me about that country. I didn't receive a culture shock. I didn't suffer from any feeling of strangeness because I had read so many books about England by English writers. I was very familiar with everything I came across. Nothing came as a surprise to me. Whereas I know that some of our students who went to study in England suffered from depression and other problems because they were totally unable to cope with the society that was to them so alien that they did not know how to adjust. So through books, through reading, you learn about other people, other societies, and you learn about yourself. Because consciously or unconsciously, you do compare yourself with the writers and with the characters in the books that you read. And that helps you to assess yourself in well, I can't say entirely objective. I don't think anybody is capable of being thoroughly objective about himself or herself. But it does give you a chance to look at yourself in a more detached way by wondering what you might have done under the same circumstances. Now I have to admit to you that I read all the Harry Potter books, and I really don't know how I could ever have been brave enough to do all the things that those children did. So when people talk about my courage, I think to myself, they don't know anything about Harry Potter. And it of course also gives you a sense of humility, which I think is good for all of us, because you realize what other people have gone through, what other people have coped with, and that your own troubles and problems are nothing compared to what some fellow human beings have been through. So for me, that is the joy of books, that it helps me to get more out of the world in which I live. It helps me also to understand other people and to make friends with those who come from a totally different culture, a totally different background. And this is something that I would like to encourage our young people to do, to read, that they might be able to appreciate differences and not just think of those who are similar to them as the good ones, the ones to whom they should stick. I have been talking frequently in the last few months about the fact that with the proliferation of internet culture, a lot of young people link up with those with similar tastes and similar ideas and similar ideals, and that they have less links with those who are different from them. Apparently, this has become a matter of concern for some who have studied the situation, that instead of trying to build a bridge between people who are different, the internet, in fact, seems to be encouraging polarization, because you search out those with whom you can share the same ideas. I think it is human nature to try to justify your ideas and your views by finding others who are ready to back you up, who have the same views and the same ideas. And when you link up with those who share these ideas and views, you get more and more entrenched in your own ideas, in your own stand, instead of reaching out to those who are different and those whose differences might in fact well have their own value. They usually do, because here we are in this room, I think from many different countries with different backgrounds, but I think it would be impossible to say that any one of us was truly superior to another, because you might be superior in some ways, in the fact superior in the sense of being better qualified, but it does not mean that you're better qualified in every way. Those who are intellectually very well advanced might not be so emotionally mature. I'm sure all of you know now that it is considered that EQ is more important than IQ when it comes to success in life. And my abbot, the abbot who I regard as my teacher, Sayadaw U Pandita, says that we should add another one, an SQ, a spiritual quotient, the spiritual aspect of a human life should not be forgotten. And this is something with which I agree wholeheartedly. Now, Now, Uthogam told me earlier that I should talk about the books that I enjoyed reading, and this is what people would like to hear. Well, and Uthogam specifically mentioned detective stories. Now, I must say that detective stories are very useful. Now that I'm the chair of the Law and Order Committee, the Rule of Law Committee, I find it very useful, having read so many detective stories and having read descriptions of many court scenes. I find that I know quite a lot more about the law than I would have just reading through law books. So, also, detective stories I find very helpful in working out what some person might be up to. When you read a detective story, or when you read as many as I have done, quite often you know very early on who the villain is. Well, that means that book is not very good. Now, the good books are the ones where you just can't tell who the villain is going to be until the very end. But I find increasingly that the more detective stories you read, the more likely you are to be able to work out who the villain is going to be, what the end of the story is going to be. And that does help you in working out what people's motives are. And that is very important in politics. It's very useful to be able to have a good idea of people's motives. The detective stories always teach you that you must ask the question, who is going to profit from a particular crime? Now, I think this is a very good a lesson for politicians. Who is going to profit from this situation? And that question will give you a clear idea of what people are up to. So detective stories are very useful. But the books that I have loved throughout, really loved, are not detective stories, although I've enjoyed them. My favorite authors, two of my favorite authors are George Eliot and Victor Hugo. Both of them, I think, because I like them, because they explore the human mind. They explore human emotions. And they also have a social and political conscience, which I consider very valuable. I've always said that my favorite character is Jean Valjean from Les Miserables, because to me he was the ultimate revolutionary. He was a man who revolutionized his whole way of looking at the world. I've always said that what we really need is a spiritual revolution, and this was what he managed to achieve very successfully. Now, the reason why I like George Eliot is also because she is very supportive of individuality and with peoples whose ideas and whose views did not quite fit into their times, but who had the courage and the strength to continue to hold on to the views that they thought were worth supporting. And I've always liked her characters because, of course, her strongest characters were women, and that's the way it should be in any good book. And they always managed to survive in spite of adversity, all sorts of adversities, and not survive in the material sense. A lot of her characters did not end up any wealthier or materially better off than they were at the beginning. But they always managed to maintain their spiritual strength throughout until the very end, pursuing the goals in which they believed. So these are the books that always inspired me. People have asked me who inspired me in politics, and I have to confess that I never thought of writers and authors, writers and book characters until I was preparing what I might say today. Then it occurred to me that I have been tremendously inspired and influenced by fictional characters and by writers, not just by historical figures or political leaders. So literature for me is not something you read just for fun or just to pass the time. It's something that I take seriously in the sense that whatever I read, I think over, I mull over certain expressions. I wonder whether what the writer says is something that I could agree with, and if I could not, why not? And why certain characters are so much more attractive to me than others. So literature is a learning process. I don't think you can ever stop learning from books. Each book that you read is different. And even if it's a terrible book, it teaches you something, because you understand what makes a book terrible, and you can avoid all the mistakes and all the weaknesses that the author has, in your opinion, indulged in. I don't think there ever will come a time when I get tired of reading books. At the moment, I have not much time to read books, not as much time as I would like. And if I say to you that I haven't even gone through 2 chapters of Hilary Mantel's Bring Up the Dead Bodies, you can see how little time I have. This is the sort of book that one should not be able to put down. But I had to put it down because I had to wade through not terribly exciting documents, which I was obliged to wade through. So all of you who have the time and the leisure to read, please take advantage of it. Please read while you can. You never know when it would come in useful, what you've read. Because even if you are placed in a situation where you no longer have access to books, you can always think of the ones you've read in the past. And talking about what you've read in the past, I must speak up for poetry. I don't know whether this is a sign of old age, but I find that I enjoy poetry more and more, that I get more out of poetry than out of prose the older I get, that each line of verse gives me more to think about sometimes than a whole book. And if you have committed some poems to memory, you will find they come in very useful should you ever be imprisoned, which I hope you will not be. But you will find it very useful, and I would encourage all of you to try to commit as many poems to memory as possible, partly to make sure that you keep your memory in good shape. It's only by memorizing that your memory remains sharp, and partly because you will find that these little lines here and there come in very useful at odd moments in your life. I think this is about enough from me now, and Dr. comes turn.
Actually, I would like to ask you another question, but I want to explain first that I was a librarian in the University of Yangon for nearly 40 years. And then during my time, I saw that the library was getting very old, and we didn't get any new books. There was no funding, and it was neglected. So I know that Dosu is now helping University of Yangon. At the same time, we also need to upgrade the public libraries, because that will encourage more readers to read not only Myanmar books, but books in English and other languages also. So I wanted to ask Dosu, in what ways you could help us upgrade the libraries?
Well, I could help straight off by asking everybody in the audience to make as big a donation as possible towards upgrading